So it's a delight and a privilege to be back here again this year to address you on what for me is a fascinating area of study. Truth matters, truth-telling matters. And I've been considering this issue of truth-telling, of truthfulness, for a number of years now. And my interest in the topic continues to grow, and I hope I'll stimulate your interest in thinking more deeply about the complexity and the profound nature of truth and of telling the truth, or of truth-telling. So the first image that you see on the screen is from Rome. It's probably familiar to some of you. It's the Bocca della Verità, the mouth of truth. Apparently, this great big face with an open mouth was originally a drain cover in classical time. And then sometime in the Middle Ages, it was inserted in the portico of a church, where you see it now, in the portico of Santa Maria in Cosmedin. If you've never been there, the next time you get a chance to go to Rome, do visit it. The legend is that if you put your hand in the mouth, if you were someone who did not tell the truth, the mouth would close and your hand would be bitten off. So evidently, concern with truth-telling is not new. And if any of you want to, there's a wonderful film, at least I think it's wonderful, Roman Holiday, 1953, an old film in which Audrey Hepburn features, and there's a lovely scene with the Bocca della Verità. So concern with truth-telling, as I've said, is not something new. The theologian and the philosopher, Thomas Aquinas, we go back. I thought I had a picture of him. The theologian and philosopher Thomas Aquinas stressed the importance of truth-telling for the good of society. Now, Thomas Aquinas actually spent some time in Rome, and he was born south of Rome. He was a very great theologian in the church. And indeed, it was with Aquinas that I started my own research. Aquinas identified truth-telling as a satellite virtue of justice. In other words, truth-telling is part of justice. To be a truthful person is to be a just person. We owe it to one another that we be truth-telling people. And I'll just give you a quote from one of his writings, a very famous one, the Summa Theologia. He said, and I'll read it in Latin and then English, "Ex honestate una homo altere debet veritatis manifestationem." Out of equity, one person owes another a manifestation of the truth. And I love that word, honestate. And I think that demands more study. What does it really mean, ex honestate? But then, is Aquinas correct? Does truth-telling really matter that much? Because many recent happenings in our world, the Western world at any rate, would suggest not. A few years ago in 2016, Oxford Dictionaries announced post-truth as their international word of the year. You'll remember that, many of you. Post-truth became a new word we heard everywhere. Post-truth was defined as relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. Post-truth, when facts don't matter, but emotion and personal belief are forming our opinions. Documented usage of the term post-truth increased by 2,000% from 2015 to 2016. The frequency spiked in June with the Brexit vote, and then in July when Donald Trump secured the Republican presidential nomination. And you see the two pictures I have there, one of the Brexit bus, as we called it, and then the other one showing how many people were actually with Donald Trump at his inauguration. There were post-truths told out after both those events, or related to both those events. The prefix post is of interest because it's normally used like post-war, after the war, post-match, we have a great celebration after the match. But the prefix in post-truth has a meaning much more like belonging to a time in which the specified concept, that is to say truth, has become unimportant and irrelevant. Post-truth. Truth is no longer important. In 2016, I read that the University of Sydney had established a post-truth research excellence initiative. Its aim, to advise on how the truth might survive in this climate. Chilling words indeed. So to return for a moment to Thomas Aquinas, truth-telling is a matter of justice. We owe it to one another that we tell the truth to one another, that we be truth-telling people. We can trust one another only if we can assume that for the most part, people are being truthful. And if we cannot trust one another, society will be destroyed. Hence, I suggest that while we are rightly concerned with ecological issues, with thermal warming, my argument is that we should be equally concerned about a culture wherein it seems that truth and truth-telling do not seem to matter all that much. We are in danger of destroying our very humanity, I suggest. So there are many tracks that one could follow. Today I'm going to focus on 3 areas, and I'm going to give most attention to the idea of truth-telling and politics. Secondly, I look at truth-telling and the academy. And thirdly, complex situations of truth-telling. Truth-telling is complex, actually. And it involves something that I call prudencia, not prudence, prudencia, wise decision-making. So now I want to introduce a woman to you called Hannah Arendt. She was born in Germany in 1906. Her parents were well-educated secular Jews, but they did ensure that Arendt received a Jewish education in the synagogue. She lived in Germany through the First World War. Before the Second World War, she left Germany and finally settled in the United States, where she followed a life of teaching at the university and of political writing. And those of you who were here last year will have heard me speak more about her life. Initially, Hannah was delighted with what she perceived as a culture of plurality and diversity in the United States. That's when she went there first, coming from a Europe that was immersed in a war. She moved to the US, she found it great. There's plurality, there's diversity. But with time, she became increasingly critical in her writings. In various writings of hers, she commends people who do not, and I quote, think it worthwhile to change their humane attitude and their natural insight into reality for the narrowness of caste spirit or the essential unreality of financial transactions. So people who will not change their humane attitude and just fit in with the crowd. These people she terms social pariahs, perpetual outsiders, who insist upon telling the truth even to the point of indecency, and that's her word, rendering themselves unpopular, but keeping their identity, who they are. Now this from a woman, a Jewish woman who had come from Europe, from the Second World War. Keep your identity, tell the truth. It is these social pariahs, she suggests, that should take their place in the polis, in society. In her classic work, the work for which she's perhaps most famous, The Origins of Totalitarianism, which is a huge tome, but worth ploughing your way through. So in her classic, The Origins of Totalitarianism, published in 1951, Hannah Arendt argues that totalitarian ideologies aim not at the transformation of the outside world or the revolutionizing transmutation of society, but the transformation of human nature itself. She wrote, "The concentration camps are the laboratories where changes in human nature are tested." Totalitarian regimes, she believed, represent an organized attempt to destroy the human being as human being, to eradicate the very concept of human being. I wonder, could something similar be said of a culture that speaks of a post-truth era? So in 1967, Hannah wrote an essay entitled Truth and Politics. The context of this essay is very important, for in 1963 she had published her report Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil. Eichmann was a Nazi, a guard who had been arrested and put on trial. He had done dreadful things, and she went to give a report on the trial. But the report she gave on the trial was not to the satisfaction of the public, because the trial also criticized Jewish people and their participation in the actual destruction of the Jews, some would say. So she was shocked at the hostility because she felt she was telling the truth, the full or a fuller truth of the story. And she was shocked by the controversy surrounding its publication, and it actually caused a breakdown in friendships for her. She was, if you like, being a social pariah by doing this, putting herself outside to tell a truth. So outrage erupted, in particular due to her judgment that her own people, the Jewish people, had acted unworthily at times. In particular, she noted that the Jewish councils, through which the Nazis had ruled some Jewish communities, had played a role in the destruction of their own people. She felt pressurized by the controversy to change her account, to suppress what she called disrupting truths. She didn't do so. But the reaction led her to ask, is it of the very essence of truth to be impotent, and of the very essence of power to be deceitful? So is truth powerless? Is it always legitimate to tell the truth? Fiat veritas et perit mundus. Should the truth be told, do the truth fiat veritas, even if the world is to perish? Arendt's argument is that to sacrifice truth for the sake of the world is futile, for if the very survival of the world is at stake. She argues that there must always be in the world people who will consciously say what is, who will say the truth. She says there's no permanence, no perseverance in existence can even be conceived of without people willing to testify to what is, to tell the truth, and what appears to them to be because it is. Truth matters, but truth is not indifferent. Arendt herself felt pressurized to deny truth, to a negation of factual truth. And in this way, she came to see the vulnerability, the fragility of factual truth. Because facts can be forgotten, they can be denied, and they can indeed be lied away, and perhaps, she says, never rediscovered. Facts, she notes, have a disturbing contingency. Facts have a disturbing contingency. Things might have been otherwise, because facts have no conclusive reason, she writes, for being what they are. If political action is understood in terms of the end justifying the means, so whatever you do, it doesn't matter as long as you arrive at the end you want, the end justifying the means, and if the ends or the goals are of pleasure, profit, domination, then all facts and all truths, she believes, are in political jeopardy. And she said this has led some to argue that truth can be sacrificed. Because lies, she says, Hobbes, another philosopher tells us, or a political thinker, are relatively harmless tools in the arsenal of political action. Now, this is writing in the 50s and 60s. Lies are relatively harmless tools in the arsenal of political action. As long as you get what you want in the world, then you can tell the lie. So, while Arendt agrees that people have a constitutional right to their opinion, she's wary in regard to how opinions are formed. So I've called this section Facts, Opinion and Truth. Arendt has seen how even factual truth, when exposed to the marketplace, to the public sphere, to the society we live in, can become blurred. Factual truth, she believes, normally pertains to events and circumstances in which many are involved. Factual truth is established through testimony by eyewitnesses. And these are, she says, notoriously unreliable. Okay? Factual truth is also established by records, documents, monuments, all of which, she says, we can suspect as perhaps being forged. To settle matters via a majority of witnesses, for Hannah Arendt, is a wholly unsatisfactory procedure. since there is nothing to prevent a majority of witnesses from being false witnesses. And indeed, under certain circumstances, the feeling of belonging to a majority may even encourage false testimony. There is nothing to prevent a majority of witnesses from being false witnesses, and under certain circumstances, the feeling of belonging to a majority may even encourage false testimony. You can see she's a challenging thinker. Factual truth, when exposed to the hostility of opinion holders, becomes very vulnerable. For factual truth is all too easily countered, not, she says, by lies and deliberate falsehoods, but very often by opinion. In matters of opinion, our thinking is truly discursive. And she says it's good that people have opinions. It's good that we voice our opinions, but our opinions must be informed opinions. Because, she says, subversive groups in a political, immature public can argue people into confusion. Subversive groups can argue people into confusion. The blurring of the dividing line between factual truth and opinion belongs, she says, among the many forms that lying can take. And yet, as the fourth US President, James Madison, said, all governments rest on opinion. No one can rise to power or keep it without the support of those who are like-minded. It is opinion and not necessarily truth that is an indispensable prerequisite of all power. In this view, politics becomes a question of numbers. This shift from truth to opinion can easily be a shift to a domain in which nothing counts except strength of numbers. What Arendt terms the ever-changing opinion of the citizen. In this way of seeing society, the demagogue can persuade the multitude. Now, these are the words of a woman writing in the 50s and 60s in the States. So her suggestion that factual truth is vulnerable is very shocking, really. She writes that freedom of opinion is a farce unless factual information is guaranteed, and the facts themselves are not in dispute. Because if we lose factual truth to opinion, we lose politics properly understood. She has a very rich understanding of politics, a very rich understanding of how society should flourish. She says it is a fact that on August the 4th, 1914, German troops crossed the frontier of Belgium. But she warns us that even this fact could be eliminated from history by a power monopoly of the entire civilized world. And she says this is far from inconceivable. If power interests have the last say, factual truth can be different. An important point for reflection, I suggest, for our world today. If power interests have the last say, factual truth can be different. Arendt writes all this, which brings us back to our suspicion that it may be in the nature of the political realm to be at war with truth in all its forms. And any claim in the sphere of human affairs to truth, to an absolute truth, whose validity needs no support from the side of opinion, strikes at the very roots of all politics and all governments. And so Arendt comes to wonder why a commitment even to factual truth is felt to be an anti-political attitude. Her answer? Truth carries within itself an element of coercion. For truth is relentless, and truth-tellers can be seen as tyrannical. Truth does not admit of debate, and it is debate that constitutes the very essence of political life, because truth is opposed to opinion. Germany invaded Belgium. The earth moves around the sun. Pythagoras' theorem, in a right-angled triangle, the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the square of the opposite two sides. All these truths, arrived at in very different ways, have in common that they are beyond argument, dispute, opinion, or consent. It doesn't matter how many accept, and whether I agree or not, the earth still moves around the sun. The content of truth, she notes, is not of a persuasive nature, but of a coercive one. And this leads her to speculate that, seen from the viewpoint of politics, truth has a despotic character. because truth is as independent of the wishes and desires of the citizens as it is independent, as is the will of the worst tyrant. Truth is independent of the wishes and desires of the citizens as is the will of the worst tyrant. Tyrants hate truth. And even in the best of political regimes, truth, she says, enjoys a rather precarious status in the eyes of governments that rest on consent and abhor coercion. In the 1960s, Arendt noted that mass manipulation of fact and opinion had become evident in the rewriting of history, in image making, and in actual government policy. Modern political lies, she says, deal efficiently with things that are not secret at all, but are known to practically everybody. They rewrite contemporary history under the eyes of those who witnessed it. The advent of mass media, and she's writing in the 60s, ensured that these lies are more in the public eye than the original fact ever was. And this is in the light of things like Vietnam, the Korean War, all those things. She's saying that things are being changed and informing people via the media. She says this form of organised lying is violent and destructive. It destroys whatever it has decided to negate. And she gives the example of Trotsky, because Trotsky's place in Russia was slowly written out of the history books when Stalin came to power, and Trotsky ended up actually being executed. Modern lies, she tells us, are different from the much less damaging traditional lies which simply hide the truth. And it's with the modern lie, her modern lie, that I think we're seeing the pathway towards our post-truth society. The traditional lie she describes as causing a hole in the fabric of reality. But as long as the fabric held, the lie would eventually show up. With the traditional lie, those lying, the statesmen and diplomats, knew they were lying, and they remained aware of the distinction between truth and falsehood. But modern political lies are different. They seek to completely rearrange history, to manipulate facts to make another reality. Self-deception is inherent to the modern lie. A successful liar falls prey to his own lies or her own lies and becomes part of the web of deception. Destructive, consistent lying pulls the ground from under our feet and provides no other ground on which to stand. And as the French thinker, the 16th century French thinker wrote, Montaigne, if falsehood, like truth, had but one face, we should know better where we are, for we should then take for certain the opposite of what the liar tells us. But the reverse of truth has 1,000 shapes and a boundless field. In the face of all these observations, Arendt notes that truth has a strength of its own. For while persuasion and violence can destroy truth, whether that be rational, religious, or factual truth, persuasion and violence cannot replace truth. Because while facts are fragile, they are resilient, they are stubborn. When a community has embarked upon organised lying on principle, truthfulness then becomes a political factor of the first order. When everybody lies about everything of importance, the role of the truth teller becomes essential. They must engage then in political business. They must become the social pariahs. They must make a start towards changing the world. But, she says, if politics rests on opinion, how can a truth teller survive and remain truthful in the political sphere? This is a challenge. And this is where what Arendt terms refuges of truth come into their own. So, refuges of truth. Truth tellers and the academy, the second part of the paper, a shorter part. And then the third part, it gets a bit lighter as we go along. That's the really heavy, dense foundation laid. So it'll get a bit lighter. We stick with Arendt for a while and then we move on to someone else. So Arendt, despite the strong critique that I've given above, remains a strong believer in politics. She's a very strong believer in politics, while being very wary of the type of politics that she was experiencing. The challenge, she believes, is to ensure truthful facts that inform opinion, to challenge the view that all opinions are equally valid, to enable informed debate. Because that's a thing we hear today, all opinions are equally valid. And Arendt would say, no, they're not. Social spaces and social practices where this can be fostered, where we can have informed debate, and where people can be formed into truth-telling are needed. She said example is important. Socrates, the philosopher, staked his life on his belief that it is better to suffer wrong than to do wrong. This is truth, not opinion, and he was executed for living a life dedicated to truthfulness. Arendt notes that Socrates taught integrity by example, and she names others who taught by example or persuaded by inspiration. She names Jesus of Nazareth and Francis of Assisi. She writes of the importance of imitatio Christi, the imitation of Christ, an idea core to Christianity. She also cites Immanuel Kant's idea of examples of virtue or holiness from history or poetry, from our novels. These people give us what she terms exemplary truth. Exemplary truth is an aid to formation into being a truth teller. Arendt also draws attention to certain public institutions, established and supported by the powers that be, in which, contrary to all political rules, truth and truthfulness have always constituted the highest criterion of speech and endeavour. These institutes she terms refuges of truth. Here she counts the judiciary, as well as all institutions of higher learning to which the state entrusts the education of its future citizens. Now, the question of truth-telling and the university is something that I'm only beginning to look at, and it's a very important question because we know the whole question of academic freedom. We know now that people are being, platformed, they're not able to speak in places. Are our universities being changed into just businesses producing people for the work market? Or can they once again be places where people learn how to think and to grow and mature? The other place where Hannah Arendt doesn't mention, but where I would like to mention and intend to do some work on it, the church as a refuge of truth and a place for the formation of people who will tell the truth. It should be thus. So she counts the judiciary. She says while all these institutions, the judiciary, the higher education places, are exposed to all the dangers arising from social and political power, the chances for truth to prevail in public are, of course, greatly improved by the mere existence of such places and by the organisation of independent, supposedly disinterested scholars associated with them. That, at least in many countries of the world, not all, the political realm has recognised that it has a stake in the existence of people and institutions over which it has no power, is, she remarks, noteworthy. Now, in Ireland at the moment, the government are trying to exercise a lot of power over universities. So there's an awful lot of talking and thinking to be done. Unwelcome truth, she says, come from these refuges of truth. Most recently in Ireland, on May the 10th, 2021, we read that 10 people shot dead in Ballymurphy, West Belfast in 1971 were all entirely innocent of any wrongdoing on the day in question. Delivering her findings in Belfast, Mrs. Justice Siobhan Keegan found that 9 out of 10 were shot by the British Army, and that in the majority of cases the force used was disproportionate. This is an example of the judiciary telling truth. Very unwelcome truths have also emerged from universities. Intellectual integrity is the mission of the university. Right, that's another image from the Justice Siobhan Keegan's judgment. So to the universities, unwelcome truths have also emerged from universities. Intellectual integrity is, or at least should be, the mission of the university. And here again, Arendt gives us pause for thought. Even in the 1960s, she was concerned, because in the US she commented that the authentic political significance of the academy is too easily overlooked because of the prominence of its professional schools and the evolution of its natural science divisions. While no one can gainsay the social and technical usefulness of the role these play, as we have recently seen with my own university, Trinity College's scientific contribution to the current pandemic, Arendt argues that the historical sciences and the humanities, which are supposed to find out, to stand over, to interpret factual truth, to interpret human documents, are politically of greater relevance. While the press, the media are indispensable as they tell us what is, or at least they're meant to tell us what is happening in the world, like the judiciary, they must be protected from political power. So our universities, our judiciary, our press must be protected from political power. The academy must form people who will courageously guard and intelligently interpret factual truth and human documents. And I think later on in these 3 days, you're going to get someone speaking on the media and truth. So, fiat veritas et periet mundus. Is it always right to tell the truth? Is it always right to tell the facts, no matter what? We will finish now with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who brings us into the complexity of truth-telling. Because sometimes there needs to be what I might call intelligent or wise truth-telling. And it'll be interesting to hear what you think of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's example. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer, again, Second World War, a Lutheran pastor, was executed for his role in the plot to kill Hitler. He also considered questions of truth-telling in his writings. The very last piece of writing he did, which is unfinished, while in a cell awaiting execution, was actually on truth-telling, which is remarkable. The political situation in which he's living made clear to him the complexity of truth-telling. In Berlin, in Nazi Germany, Bonhoeffer came to the view that to betray a friend to a murderer is a grotesque misunderstanding of why one should tell the truth. Truth is to be told not out of loyalty to abstract principles or to keep our consciences pure. Rather, truth is to be responsible. Responsible to God, for Bonhoeffer, and responsible to our neighbour. And that applies to all of us, whether we believe in God or not. In an unfinished essay, What is Meant by Telling the Truth, Bonhoeffer ponders not a theory of truth, but like Arendt wonders, what does it mean to be truthful, to live truthfully? He was interrogated regularly, and while he was being interrogated, he was challenged to think deeply on his belief that truth matters, and at once to conceal the true facts with regard to the planned assassination of Hitler. He was involved in the plan, he knew about the plan, but he wanted to protect the plan and the other people involved with him, the conspirators, so he didn't reveal their names, so he didn't tell the truth. I want to focus solely then on one context, his consideration of the relationship between a parent and a child, an adult and a child. He notes that the truthfulness of a child towards their parents is essentially different from that of the parents towards their child. What do we owe it that we tell our child? What does the child owe that they tell us? Telling the truth, he suggests, is something that must be learnt. It calls upon one to read the situation one is in. The more complex the situation, the more difficult it is to know what to tell the truth means. Now, he gives many examples. The one I've chosen I find very interesting. He said, a child is asked publicly in the classroom if his father comes home drunk at night. While yes, this is the case, the fact, the child denies this to the teacher. Bonhoeffer rules that in this situation, it is the teacher that is wrong. Because this question should not have been asked in this way of a child who has not yet worked out how to answer this question in such a way as to protect the family and at once, and the same time, satisfy the rule of the school, read truth-telling. Indeed, the child has told a lie, but for Bonhoeffer, this lie contains truth, as the child's action serves to preserve the institution of the family and to protect his parents' weakness. While formally untrue, Bonhoeffer urges us to resist judging the child's action as telling a lie. Another challenging example he poses is that of a child who reports their parents to the state police for having uttered a dismissive word about Adolf Hitler. If that parent has subsequently been taken to a concentration camp, how should we assess the child's action? The child stated verbatim the parent's words, but on Bonhoeffer's view, a despicable lie has been told. He believes that in a perverted order of the real, the mandate of governance, of God's governance, had been twisted by the Nazis and turned into something demonic. The child had been involved in an act of betrayal involving a lie. Truth-telling, to really tell the truth, calls upon us to act intelligently, to think about occasion, relation, who or what entitles me to speak. Appropriate truth-telling is a virtue of the mature. And so, some short concluding thoughts. It is clear that to say what is, to speak the truth, is to express the real. To speak the truth is to know the facts. Facts inhabit a story, facts inform opinions, facts demand interpretation. Words are embedded in a story, in a narrative, they're embedded in a relationship. When words become homeless, they lose their truth-bearing capacity. For truth-telling, which is rooted in facts, is much more complex. One must consider those to be betrayed in Bonhoeffer's account: the family of the father who drinks too much, the parents of the child who goes to the Nazis. And then we've got to consider the story of the person who has cancer or any other serious illness. Do they want to hear the truth, and how much truth can they take? Do they want to know the science? And what about with a child? Is complete transparency always the best, the correct course of action? Should a parent really answer a child if the child asks them, "Did you ever take drugs, Mum?" as a friend of mine recently said to me? Should they tell the truth, or what should they say? How do you deal with those situations? Truth inhabits a story. Truth is facts, but it is more than facts. A simple example very pertinent to me is feedback to a student. To be truthful but helpful at once. If I've got a piece of work that really, gosh, I say, what in God, were they in the class at all? How do I find the good within that so I don't just flatten them? There is a way of telling the truth. In a new relationship, is it best to tell them all about my past relationships? Do I have to? Should I? As a child becomes an adult, do they always have to tell their parent where they are and what they are doing? Things change. Truth-telling is complex. So let us leave the final word, I think, to Hannah Arendt, who's a very good guide in all of this. Conceptually, she says, we may call truth what we cannot change. Metaphorically, it is the ground on which we stand and the sky that stretches above us. We may call truth what we cannot change, but metaphorically, it is the ground on which we stand and the sky that stretches above us. Thank you very much.